Hi everyone, my name is Ryan. Welcome to lesson 24 of learning HTML and CSS. In this lesson we'll be learning about CSS borders. In our previous lesson we learned about the box model, and we said that every item on the page has a content area and an optional padding, border and margin. So we're focusing on border in this lesson. Let's go and have a look at W3 schools and backgrounds and borders. Everything related to borders begins with the word border. So you can see there are quite a number of different style sheets related to working with borders. But it's actually a lot easier than it looks. So I'm going to break it down into little steps for you. We're only going to focus on the CSS 1 and 2 elements, not the 3 elements, because those are still experimental. So to begin with, we'll look at border color. This sets the color of the border, and we learned all about colors in a previous lesson and how to set those colors. There are essentially 3 ways of doing that: either hex triplet method, hexadecimal, or you can use RGB, which is with normal decimal, or you can actually give the name of the color. If you're not sure on working with colors, please go back to the previous lesson and revise that. So once you've set the color of the border, the next thing to set would be the width of the border, which is border-width. And this can be a value of medium, thin or thick. I would rather say that you should use the length property, which is measured in pixels, which gives you a much more accurate control. And then we also have the style of the border. So that would be border-style, which is basically the type of border that you want: solid, dotted, dashed, double. The last 4, which are grooved, ridge, inset and outset, are all 3-dimensional borders with a shadow on different sides of the box. Or you could say none, which is the default. So let's go back to our HTML page and let's experiment with borders on headings, paragraphs and images. So here's my HTML. It's just 2 paragraphs. There's my heading, there's my 2 pictures next to each other. I've just used the same picture twice because I'm lazy, and they're both in the same paragraph. Okay, so I'm linking to lesson 24.css, which is currently empty. We'll begin by adding a border around our heading. So it will be border-width, colon, and how wide do you want your border? Let's say 2 pixels. Then what color do I want my border to be? I'll just use red. And the style of border that I want, let's make it dotted. So normally you need all 3 of these in order to get some kind of border going. And there you can see the dotted red border, which is 2 pixels, right around the heading. Notice that it's the full width of the browser because, remember, a heading is a block element, and a block element always takes the full width of the browser by default. We can, of course, set the width of that block element to reduce it, but if we don't set it, it takes up the full width of the browser. Okay, let's try experiment with this. Maybe try a thicker border of 10 pixels, and I'll just change the dotted to dashed just so you see the difference. And why not change the color while we add it to a green. Okay, so that doesn't look as nice. Being 10 pixels, it looks a little bit irritating to the eye, but you can see that it's dotted. So let me reduce the width back down to 2 pixels, which I think looks a bit neater. And you can see that it's dotted. Okay, a popular one would be a solid border of black. That's very common. And then the three-dimensional borders, for example, inset. Can't see it very nicely being black, so let's try a grayish color, and I'll make it a bit thicker as well, and you can see what's going on. Okay, so you can see that there's a kind of a darker black at the top and on the left, but on the right and on the bottom it's a gray. And I think if I make it even thicker, you'll see the three-dimensional effect. Okay, so you can see the kind of diagonal line producing that shadow effect. So that's an inset. Remember, there are 4 different three-dimensional borders: groove, ridge, inset, and outset. They basically just put the shadow on different sides of the box. So if I try, let's say, an outset instead of an inset, you can see it's just reversed the shadow. Let's try ridge. Okay, that looks quite nice. And groove. Groove is the opposite of that. Okay, so that is the basics of working with borders. Let's now try some borders on paragraph and also on our pictures. So I'll start with the pictures. Okay, so there we have a dotted red border of 5 pixels. Now you can see how they're really touching each other. That we can fix in a later lesson when we look at margin. And then finally, a paragraph. Let's use a double border this time around. And I'll just make it green. Okay, so the actual text turned green, which is interesting. Just see why that happened. Okay, I should have said border dash color, not color. Okay, so remember we spoke about the box model. Content in the middle, border on the outside with padding in between. Well, here you can see how ugly this looks with no padding. The text is practically touching the border. So in our next lesson we'll be looking at padding and how to improve the look of this. Now let's look at the shorthand for working with a border. So this can be replaced with one line of code. Just say border colon, then you put the width, then the style, then the color. So I've commented this out because obviously you're saying the same thing twice otherwise. You either use the longhand or use the shorthand. What's important with the border is you need to get the order of these items in the correct. So first the width, then the style, then the color. And you see it does the same thing. Just for demo purposes, I'll make it dotted, just so you can see. Okay. So I think it's much easier to use the shorthand instead of the longhand. Going back to W3 schools, you'll see that you can also set individual borders. For example, there's border dash left dash color, border dash left dash style, border dash left dash width. And that applies to the right, the top, as well as the bottom of the border. And what's nice is that each of these borders also has a shorthand. So you could just say border bottom and set those 3 properties, or border top and set those 3 properties. So let me do an example for you. I'll do it with the image. So I'll say border dash top, and I'll just do a top border on the image. That's it. Okay, it's difficult to see now because the 2 images are also in a paragraph, so they also have that green border. So let me just remove that paragraph border for now, and let's make this a little thicker as well. So you can see now the black border just on the top of the images. So then I can also do a right border, for example, but this time around I'll do a different color. And so you could choose then as to which sides of the box, in this case the right and the top, in which sides of the box you want to put your border. And this ends our lesson in working with borders.